Welcome to the Fear Files channel. Today we're diving into one of the most mysterious and sinister stories that continues to haunt researchers, conspiracy theorists, and anyone who's ever heard of it. This is a story that began in August 1966 in Brazil and became known as the lead mask case. Two dead men, two engineers, found on a hilltop in strange suits and homemade lead masks on their faces. Next to them lay a mysterious note with instructions that resembled more of a script for some occult ritual. The cause of their death was never officially established, and the circumstances of the case are so strange that theories range from poisoning to contact with aliens. Settle in, because today we'll examine every detail of this case, every clue, every theory, and try to understand what really happened on Vintim Hill that fateful day. August 20th, 1966. The small town of Niterói, Rio de Janeiro State, Brazil. It was a Sunday, a regular day off for most people. But for Manuel Pereira de Cruz, this day became the beginning of a nightmare that would be etched into the history of forensics and paranormal phenomena. Manuel was an ordinary teenager who decided to fly a kite on Vintim Hill, also known as Morro do Vintim. This place was quite popular among locals for walks and entertainment, though quite secluded. The hill rose above the city, offering a beautiful view of the surroundings, which is why the boy chose it for his innocent pastime. Climbing up the hillside, Manuel noticed something strange in the thick grass not far from the path. At first he thought it was some trash or discarded clothing, but coming closer, he saw something that made his heart beat faster. These were bodies. Two people lay on their backs, neatly, almost perfectly parallel to each other, as if they had been deliberately positioned that way. They were dressed in strict business suits, new, clean, obviously recently purchased. On both their faces were strange masks, resembling protective shields that completely covered their eyes and forehead. These masks were made of lead, a heavy metal usually used for radiation protection. Next to the bodies lay two towels, neatly rolled up, and an empty water bottle. The boy ran down the hill in horror and told local residents about his discovery. The police arrived at the scene fairly quickly, but by that time, several days had passed since the men's death, perhaps even more. Brazil's tropical climate, the heat and humidity had done their work. The bodies were severely decomposed, which significantly complicated the investigation. The first thing that caught the investigators' attention was the strange scene. No signs of struggle, no signs of violence, no visible wounds or injuries. The men lay peacefully, as if they had simply lain down to rest and fallen asleep forever. But the lead masks on their faces, the new suits, and the neatness with which the scene was organized suggested that something was very wrong here. During the examination of the crime scene, police discovered several important items. First, there was a note, a small piece of paper with strange instructions written on it. The text was written in Portuguese. The handwriting was neat, clearly written in a calm environment, with no signs of panic or haste. The note said, 1630, take capsules, after the effect put on masks, and wait for signal. This phrase became key to the investigation, but at the same time, it raised more questions than answers. What were these capsules? What effect were they expecting? What signal were they waiting for? And most importantly, who gave them these instructions? Police quickly established the identities of the deceased. These were Manuel Pereira de Cruz, the same name as the boy who found the bodies, and Miguel Jose Viano. Both men were electronics engineers, working in the neighboring city of Campos dos Goitacazes. They were friends, colleagues, and had a reputation as serious, responsible people. Manuel was 32 years old, Miguel 34. Both were married, had families, stable jobs, and, according to relatives, showed no signs of wanting to commit suicide. They weren't observed to be depressed, having financial problems, or any conflicts that could explain their strange death. Investigators began reconstructing the last days of Manuel and Miguel's lives. It turned out that on August 17th, Wednesday, they traveled together to Niterói. They told their families they were going on business related to work and needed to buy some materials for a project. Witnesses saw them in the city. They visited several stores, bought those same new suits they were later found in, and also purchased waterproof raincoats, although the weather was clear and no rain was expected. This was another strange moment. Why do they need raincoats in such weather? Perhaps they planned to spend the night on the hill and wanted to protect themselves from morning dew? Or were the raincoats needed for something else, for some ritual or experiment? After shopping, Manuel and Miguel headed to Vinton Hill. On the way, they stopped at a small bar where they bought a bottle of water. The bar owner later told police that the men looked calm, even somewhat excited, as if they were eagerly awaiting something important. One of them looked at his watch several times, checking the time. This was the last reliable information about their movements. After the bar, they headed to the hill, and no one saw them alive again. 3 days passed before the boy with the kite found them. When the bodies were discovered, police immediately began forensic examination. But problems began here. Due to the heat and the time that had passed since death, the bodies were in such condition that conducting a full autopsy was extremely difficult. Internal organs were severely decomposed, making it impossible to accurately determine the cause of death using standard methods. Toxicological analysis was also hampered because most toxins by that time could have decomposed or changed beyond recognition. Despite all efforts, forensic experts couldn't definitively establish what exactly killed Manuel and Miguel. No clear traces of poisoning were found, no specific substances in their bodies, no signs of mechanical asphyxiation or other physical damage. However, there were some interesting details. No external injuries, wounds, bruises, or cuts were found on the bodies. This ruled out the version of violent death at the hands of another person, unless a poison was used that leaves no visible traces. Also, no traces of vomiting were found, which could indicate poisoning by certain types of poisons. The positions of the bodies were so calm that it seemed as if the men had simply lain down and lost consciousness without experiencing the convulsions or seizures that often accompany death by poisoning. This led some experts to think that if it was poisoning, the substance was very fast-acting and caused instant loss of consciousness, followed by death. The lead masks became a central element of the mystery. They were homemade, cut from sheets of lead, with holes for the nose and mouth, but completely covering the eyes. Lead, as is known, is used for radiation protection, and this immediately gave rise to the theory that the men might have been conducting some experiment related to radioactive materials. But no traces of radiation were found at the scene. Dosimeters showed normal background levels, no anomalies. Also, no devices, instruments, or materials were found that could be related to radiation. So why do they need these masks? The note with instructions became another important clue that investigators tried to decipher. The phrase, "take capsules," after the effect "put on masks," and "wait for signal," sounded like part of some ritual or experiment. The capsules were clearly something important. They could contain a drug, poison, hallucinogen, or some other substance. The effect mentioned in the note could be anything from an altered state of consciousness to a physical reaction. And the signal? What signal were they waiting for? Who was supposed to give this signal? Perhaps they were waiting for some celestial phenomenon, a flash of light, a sound, or even contact with unidentified flying objects. Investigators began digging deeper into Manuel and Miguel's lives, trying to find some leads. And here, interesting details began to surface. It turned out that both men were interested in spiritualism and occult practices. In Brazil in those years, as now, spiritualism was quite a widespread phenomenon. Many people believed in the possibility of communicating with spirits, in the existence of parallel worlds, and in the human ability to go beyond the physical body. Manuel and Miguel were members of a small group interested in these topics. They attended spiritualist seances, read books about meditation, astral projection, and contact with higher powers. One of the men's acquaintances told police that shortly before their death, Manuel and Miguel talked about some important experiment they were planning to conduct. They were excited and said they would soon be able to prove the existence of other dimensions or even make contact with higher beings. They mentioned that they would need to take a certain substance that would help them achieve an altered state of consciousness necessary for this contact. The lead masks, according to them, were needed for protection from harmful radiation that could occur during the experiment. But from what radiation? And where was it supposed to come from? This information opened a new version of what happened. Perhaps Manuel and Miguel really were conducting some occult ritual or experiment related to altering consciousness. They could have taken some psychedelic substance, drug, or hallucinogen, hoping to achieve a state in which they could make contact with other worlds or beings. The lead masks were part of their protection, though from what exactly they were protecting themselves remains a mystery. Perhaps they believed that during contact, some kind of energetic or even physical impact would occur, for which they would need to protect their eyes and face. But if this was simply an attempt to conduct a spiritualist experiment, what went wrong? Why did both men die? If they took some substance, it clearly turned out to be much more dangerous than they expected. Perhaps they made a mistake with the dosage or took a completely different substance, not the one they planned. Or maybe someone deliberately substituted the capsules, knowing this would lead to their death. But investigators had no evidence that a third person was involved in the case. All evidence indicated that Manuel and Miguel acted independently, voluntarily went to the hill, and took those very capsules themselves. Police tried to find the source of the capsules, but this proved nearly impossible. In the 1960s in Brazil, there were many ways to obtain various substances, both legal and illegal. No records were found of Manuel or Miguel purchasing drugs or any unusual chemical substances. Their homes were searched, but nothing suspicious was discovered. No diaries, notes about the planned experiment, no contacts with people who could have helped them obtain unusual substances. This was a dead end. Meanwhile, various theories about what really happened on Vintim Hill began appearing in the press. One of the most popular versions was related to UFOs. In those years, interest in unidentified flying objects and the possibility of contact with aliens was at its peak. People around the world reported sightings of strange objects in the sky, contact with aliens, and abductions. Brazil also had its cases of UFO sightings, and the Niterói area was no exception. Some witnesses claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky over Vintim Hill on the day Manuel and Miguel presumably died. These lights were described as bright, orange, or red, moving in an unusual manner, unlike the movement of planes or helicopters. UFO theory supporters suggested that Manuel and Miguel were trying to make contact with aliens. The lead masks were needed for protection from radiation that could come from spacecraft. The capsules they took were supposed to help them achieve a state in which contact would become possible, perhaps some altered frequency of consciousness on which aliens communicate. According to this theory, something went wrong during contact. Perhaps the radiation from the UFO was too strong and killed the men despite the mass protection. Or the capsules caused an unexpected reaction that led to their death. Some even suggested that Manuel and Miguel were killed by the aliens themselves, who didn't want their existence to be revealed. However, this theory had many weaknesses. First, there was no objective evidence of UFO presence. Eyewitness testimony was contradictory and unreliable. Second, if aliens really wanted to establish contact, why kill those trying to communicate with them? And finally, lead masks could hardly protect against some unknown alien radiation if it even existed. But despite all these arguments, the UFO theory continued to live and attract supporters, especially among those who believed in the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. Another theory suggested that Manuel and Miguel were victims of some secret government experiment. During the Cold War years, many countries, including Brazil, conducted various secret programs related to studying the effects of drugs on human consciousness, developing psychotronic weapons, and other similar things. It's known that the CIA in the USA conducted the MKUltra program, within which various psychedelic substances were tested on unsuspecting people. Perhaps something similar was happening in Brazil? According to this version, Manuel and Miguel could have been recruited or deceived by someone from government structures. They might have been told they were participating in an important scientific experiment and given capsules with some experimental substance. The lead masks could have been part of this experiment, supposedly for protection from some radiation. The men, trusting them, took the capsules and put on the masks, not suspecting that the substance would prove deadly. After their death, those behind the experiment could have simply disappeared, leaving the bodies on the hill and leaving no trace of their presence. This theory also had its problems. No evidence was found of Manuel and Miguel's connection to any government structures or secret programs. Their work was ordinary, civilian. They had no security clearances or contacts with the military. Moreover, if it was a government experiment, why leave the bodies in a visible place where they could easily be found? It would have been more logical to hide traces of the crime. But supporters of this theory claimed that perhaps the experiment didn't go according to plan, and the organizers simply didn't have time to remove the bodies before they were discovered. There was another, more prosaic version: suicide. Maybe Manuel and Miguel had some problems that their loved ones didn't know about. Financial difficulties, debts, blackmail, or some other circumstances that led them to decide to end their lives. They could have planned this together, bought poison, agreed on a place and time. The note with instructions could have been their own plan for exactly how they wanted to leave life. The lead masks could have had some symbolic meaning for them, related to their beliefs or simply a desire to hide their faces at the moment of death. But this version also didn't explain all the details. First, everyone who knew Manuel and Miguel claimed they had no signs of depression or desire to commit suicide. They were in good spirits before the trip, making plans for the future. Second, why would they buy new expensive suits if they were planning to die? Third, the phrase "wait for signal" in the note clearly indicated they were expecting something, some event, and not simply planning to die. And finally, if it was suicide, where did they get the poison, and why were no traces of it found in their bodies? The investigation reached a dead end. The police couldn't find convincing evidence for any of the versions. The case was officially closed as death under unexplained circumstances. The families of Manuel and Miguel were left without answers, and the public continued to speculate about what really happened on Vinton Hill. Over the years, interest in the case would fade and then flare up again when new witnesses or new theories appeared. One interesting detail that surfaced later was information that shortly before their death, Manuel and Miguel visited a local spiritualist, a person who supposedly could communicate with spirits and predict the future. This spiritualist, whose name was never publicly revealed, told people about the existence of parallel worlds and the possibility of traveling between them. He claimed that such travel required special preparation, including taking certain substances and using protective means. Perhaps it was from him that Manuel and Miguel got the idea for their experiment, and possibly the capsules themselves. Police tried to find this spiritualist, but by that time he had already left the Niterói area, and his trail was lost. Some claimed he was a charlatan who deceived gullible people, selling them various potions and promising contact with the otherworld. Others believed he really possessed some knowledge or abilities, but didn't warn his clients about the danger of what they were about to do. In any case, this spiritualist could have shed light on many questions related to the lead mask case, but he disappeared, and nothing more was heard about him. Years passed, and the case gradually became one of Brazil's most famous unsolved mysteries. It became overgrown with legends, myths, and various interpretations. Some saw it as proof of UFO existence and contact with aliens. Others considered it an example of how far people can go in their occult searches. Still others simply shrugged and said we would never know the truth. In the 1980s, one Brazilian journalist conducted his own investigation of the case. He interviewed everyone he could find who was somehow connected to Manuel and Miguel or to the investigation of their death. He studied police archives, medical reports, spoke with witnesses. As a result of his work, he concluded that the most likely version was poisoning as a result of a failed experiment related to occult practices. In his opinion, Manuel and Miguel really were trying to achieve an altered state of consciousness to make contact with some higher forces or parallel worlds. They took some substance which they thought would help them with this, but it proved deadly. The journalist also suggested that the lead masks might not have been related to radiation protection, but to symbolism that the men attributed to their ritual. In some occult traditions, lead is associated with the planet Saturn, with transition from one state to another. Perhaps the masks were part of a symbolic act designed to facilitate their transition to another dimension or state of being. Unfortunately, this transition proved final and irreversible. The journalist's article caused a new wave of interest in the case, but brought no new solid evidence. The case remained unsolved, and the truth continued to elude researchers. However, the journalist's work helped systematize the known information and present the most likely picture of what happened based on available facts. In the 1990s, another interesting detail emerged. One of the former police officers who worked on the case in 1966 gave an interview shortly before his death in which he admitted that the investigation was not conducted very thoroughly. He said that at the time, the police didn't have sufficient resources and experience to work with such strange cases. Many clues could have been missed or incorrectly interpreted. He also mentioned that there was some pressure from above to close the case as quickly as possible, so as not to create panic among the population and not attract unnecessary attention to the city. This admission confirmed the suspicions of many researchers that the investigation was incomplete and that some important aspects of the case may have been deliberately hidden or ignored. With the development of technologies and forensic methods in the 2000s, proposals arose to reopen the case and conduct a modern examination. However, it turned out that most of the physical evidence was lost or destroyed. The bodies of Manuel and Miguel had long been buried. An exhumation, even if permitted, would hardly yield any results after so many years. The note, lead masks, and other items found at the scene disappeared from police archives under unexplained circumstances. Only photographs and interrogation protocols remained, which, although containing useful information, couldn't replace real evidence. Nevertheless, interest in the lead mask case didn't fade. It became part of pop culture, mentioned in books, documentaries, and television programs about unsolved mysteries and paranormal phenomena. Each new generation discovered this story for themselves and tried to find their own answers to the questions it raised. The internet gave new life to the case, allowing enthusiasts from around the world to exchange information, theories, and findings. One modern theory that gained traction on the internet was the version that Manuel and Miguel could have been members of some secret cult or secret society. According to this theory, their death was part of some initiation ritual that went wrong. There are many secret societies in the world that practice various esoteric rituals, and Brazil is no exception. Perhaps the men were novices trying to pass a test to be accepted into such a society, but the ritual proved deadly. This theory tried to explain many strange details of the case. The new suits could have been ritual clothing, the lead mask part of the ceremony, and the capsules contained a substance that was supposed to induce a trance or visions necessary for passing initiation. The signal they were waiting for could have been a sign from the cult leader or from other members that the ritual was complete. But if so, where were these other members? Why didn't they help the men when they began dying? Or was death part of the plan, and Manuel and Miguel were sacrificed for some purposes of the cult? Despite all its appeal, this theory also suffered from lack of evidence. No connections were found between Manuel and Miguel and any known cults or secret societies. Their friends and colleagues didn't notice any suspicious contacts or strange behavior that could indicate belonging to something like that. Moreover, if this was the work of a cult, the bodies would hardly have been left in such an open place where they could easily be found. Another version that appeared relatively recently is related to the possibility that Manuel and Miguel were experimenting with homemade electronic devices that could generate some radiation or magnetic field. They were electronics engineers, and they had the knowledge and skills to create various devices. Maybe they were trying to create a device that, in their opinion, could establish a connection with other dimensions or enhance their psychic abilities. In this case, the lead masks really served as protection, but not from alien radiation, but from electromagnetic waves generated by their own device. According to this theory, the experiment went wrong, and the radiation from the device turned out to be more powerful and dangerous than they calculated. It could have caused cardiac arrest or brain damage. The capsules in this context could have contained some substance that they thought would increase their sensitivity to radiation or protect their bodies from its harmful effects. But in reality, everything turned out the opposite, and the combination of the substance and radiation killed them. The device they used could have been taken away by someone after their death, or it simply didn't work the way they expected and left no traces. This theory is interesting in that it tries to combine a rational explanation with the unusual circumstances of the case. It takes into account the men's profession and their interest in esotericism, suggesting they were trying to find a scientific approach to paranormal phenomena. However, like all other theories, it remains merely a supposition not supported by solid evidence. It's interesting to note that the lead mask case was not the only strange incident in that area during that period. Several months later, in early 1967, in a neighboring town, the body of another man was discovered under similar circumstances. He was also found dead in an open area with no visible signs of violence, and strange objects were found nearby that could be related to occult practices. Although he wasn't wearing a lead mask, the similarity to Manuel and Miguel's case was noticeable enough to attract researchers' attention. Police tried to find a connection between these cases, but unsuccessfully. This third case remained as much a mystery as the first. Moreover, mentions of several other similar incidents in different parts of Brazil in the 1960s and 1970s were found in local newspaper archives. In some cases, people were found dead in strange poses, with unusual objects nearby, sometimes with notes containing mysterious instructions. In none of these cases was it possible to establish the exact cause of death. It seemed that throughout the country there existed some underground network of people practicing dangerous esoteric experiments, but no evidence of the existence of such an organized group was found. This observation led some researchers to think that in those years in Brazil there really existed a widespread movement of people fascinated by the search for spiritual enlightenment through unconventional and often dangerous methods. The 1960s were a time of cultural revolution, experiments with consciousness, interest in Eastern philosophies, and psychedelic substances. The hippie movement, although more widespread in the USA and Europe, also influenced Latin America. People were looking for new ways of knowing reality, going beyond ordinary perception, and not all these searches ended well. In the context of that era, Manuel and Miguel's story begins to look not like a single strange case, but as part of a broader social phenomenon. They were not the only ones trying to find answers to eternal questions about the nature of reality, about the existence of other worlds, about the possibility of contact with something greater than our everyday life. The tragedy was that their search led them to death, and we may never know what exactly they were looking for and what they found in their last moments on that hill. The psychological aspect of the case also deserves attention. What makes two adult, educated men with families and stable jobs risk their lives for some experiment? What force or conviction was so strong that they were willing to take unknown capsules, put on strange masks, and go to a secluded hill, not knowing what awaited them? Psychologists who studied the case suggested that Manuel and Miguel might have been experiencing some existential crisis, a search for the meaning of life that was not satisfied by their everyday existence. There is a fundamental need in humans to understand their place in the universe, to find answers to questions about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. For most people, these questions remain at the level of philosophical reflections or find answers in religion. But some are not satisfied with traditional answers and begin to seek their own path. Manuel and Miguel, it seems, were exactly such people. Their interest in spiritualism and occultism was an attempt to find direct experience, proof of the existence of something beyond the material world. This search was not unique to them. Throughout human history, there have been people who went to extreme measures for spiritual experience. Shamans used hallucinogenic plants for journeys to other worlds. Mystics subjected themselves to extreme forms of asceticism to achieve enlightenment. Alchemists experimented with dangerous substances in search of the philosopher's stone and elixir of immortality. Many of these searches ended tragically, but this didn't stop the next seekers. The desire to touch mystery, to know the unknown, turns out to be stronger than the fear of death. Perhaps Manuel and Miguel believed they were on the threshold of a great discovery. Perhaps someone or something convinced them that they had a special mission or abilities that would allow them to establish contact with higher forces. In a state of such certainty, people are capable of actions that from the outside look irrational or even insane. But for those performing these actions, everything makes sense. Everything is subordinated to a higher purpose that justifies any risk. It's also worth considering the possibility that Manuel and Miguel were deceived or manipulated by someone. The world is full of people who use others' gullibility for their own purposes. Charlatans, fraudsters, false prophets have always found followers among those desperately seeking answers or wanting to believe in something unusual. Perhaps someone convinced the man that he had special knowledge or a substance that would allow them to achieve enlightenment or contact with other worlds. This person could have given them capsules without revealing what they actually contained or deliberately giving them something dangerous. The motives for such deception could be different. It could be the mercenary goal of extracting money from gullible people. It could be the psychopathic desire to manipulate and control others, or even a sincere but mistaken belief in the effectiveness and safety of the methods used. History knows many examples when charismatic leaders led their followers to death, sincerely believing they were doing the right thing. If Manuel and Miguel became victims of such a manipulator, then finding this person should have been a priority for the investigation. However, as we already know, the mysterious spiritualist they visited disappeared, and nothing more is known about him. There is another aspect of the case that is rarely discussed, but which may be important. This is the question of whether Manuel and Miguel were the only participants in the experiment or ritual they were conducting. The note says they need to wait for signal. A signal implies that someone was supposed to give it. Was this someone physically present on the hill or nearby? Or was the signal supposed to come from somewhere else, perhaps from the sky, from space, from another dimension? If there was a third person on the hill, where is he now? Why didn't he help the men when it became clear that something was going wrong? Or was help impossible because the action of the capsules was instant and irreversible? Or maybe this third person was the one who organized all this, and after Manuel and Miguel's death simply left, leaving their bodies on the hill? In this case, we're dealing not with an accident or suicide, but with murder carefully planned and disguised as an occult experiment. Police did consider the version of a third person. Searches were conducted for traces of another person at the scene, but nothing was found. However, considering that the bodies were discovered several days later, and the place was open and accessible to outsiders, traces could have been destroyed or erased by time and weather conditions. Surveys were also conducted of people living near the hill, but no one saw or heard anything suspicious in those days. However, one witness, a boy who often played in the vicinity of the hill, later said that a few days before the bodies were discovered, he saw a strange man climbing the hill. This was a middle-aged man dressed in dark clothing who was carrying some bag or bundle. The boy didn't attach importance to this at the moment because people sometimes climbed the hill and there was nothing unusual about it. But when he heard about the bodies found, he remembered this man and told the police about him. Unfortunately, the description was too vague to identify the person, and this lead led nowhere. Another detail that attracted the attention of some researchers is the exact time indicated in the note, 1630. Why exactly this time? Did it have some special significance? Numerologists and esotericists try to find hidden meaning in these numbers. 1630 can be broken down into different combinations. 1 plus 6 equals 7, 3 plus 0 equals 3, 7 and 3, 17 and 30, and so on. In various occult traditions, numbers have symbolic meaning, and perhaps this time was not chosen randomly. Others paid attention to astronomical phenomena. Perhaps at 1630 something special was supposed to happen in the sky. Planetary alignment, solar eclipse, appearance of a comet, or something else. Astronomers checked this version but found no significant astronomical event occurring at this time on that day. The sky was ordinary, without any special phenomena. So the mystery of the time 1630 remains unsolved. It's also interesting to consider what the phrase, after the effect, means in the note. The effect of what substance exactly were they expecting? If it was a hallucinogen, the effect could consist of visions, alteration of perception of time and space, sensation of leaving the body. If it was a stimulant, the effect could be increased energy, sharpening of senses, acceleration of thought processes. If it was a sedative drug, the effect could be relaxation, drowsiness, reduction of anxiety. Each of these options suggests different goals for the experiment. If Manuel and Miguel expected a hallucinogenic effect, then they possibly wanted to see other worlds, meet spirits or entities, receive some revelation or vision. Lead mass in this context could serve to disconnect visual perception of the ordinary world and focus on internal visions. Many psychedelic practices include elements of sensory deprivation, when a person isolates themselves from external stimuli to immerse more deeply in internal experience. If they expected a stimulating effect, then the goal could be to achieve a state of heightened awareness in which they could perceive signals or energies inaccessible in a normal state. Some occult practices claim that there exist subtle energies or frequencies that a person can perceive only in a special state of consciousness. Maybe Manuel and Miguel were trying to tune into such a frequency to establish contact with something or someone. If they took a sedative substance, then perhaps the goal was to achieve a state of deep meditation or trance in which consciousness could separate from the body and travel in astral planes. Practices of astral projection exist in many esoteric traditions, and some people claim they can intentionally leave their physical body and travel in non-material forms. To facilitate such an exit, various substances are sometimes used that relax the body and free consciousness. Whatever the goal, the result turned out tragic. Instead of enlightenment or contact with higher forces, Manuel and Miguel found only death. Their bodies remained on the hill, and their souls, if one believes in the existence of the soul, went where they perhaps so aspired to get during life. The irony of the situation is that they may have actually achieved their goal, exit beyond physical existence, but the price was their life. From the perspective of forensic medicine, the absence of an exact cause of death remains the most puzzling aspect of the case. Modern toxicology is capable of detecting a huge number of different substances in the human body, even a considerable time after death. But in 1966, technologies were much more limited. The tests conducted then could detect only the most common poisons and drugs. If Manuel and Miguel took some exotic or rare substance, a plant alkaloid from a little-known plant, or a synthetic compound that was just beginning to appear in those years. Then standard tests of that time simply couldn't detect it. There's also the probability that the substance completely decomposed by the time analyses were conducted. Some chemical compounds are unstable and rapidly break down in the body, especially at high temperature and humidity. If the bodies lay in the heat for several days, then many organic compounds could turn into unrecognizable decomposition products that were impossible to identify. Another medical mystery. Why did both people die simultaneously and in identical poses? Even if they took an identical dose of the same substance, each body's reaction is individual. One person could die faster, another slower. One could experience seizures and convulsions, another simply lose consciousness. But apparently, Manuel and Miguel died almost synchronously, peacefully, without signs of agony. This suggests an extremely fast-acting substance that causes instant cessation of vital functions, possibly affecting the respiratory center in the brain or heart function. There exists a class of substances known as nerve agents that can cause exactly such an effect. They block the transmission of nerve impulses, leading to paralysis of all muscles, including respiratory ones. Death comes from suffocation, but this happens so quickly that a person doesn't have time to realize what's happening and doesn't show external signs of struggle. Such substances were used for military purposes, and some of them were known in the 1960s. But where could two electronics engineers get a military-grade nerve agent? This seems extremely unlikely, but theoretically possible. An alternative version is related to natural toxins. In nature, there exist many plants, animals, and fungi containing deadly poisons. Some of these toxins act very quickly and leave no obvious traces. For example, tetrodotoxin, contained in fugu fish and some other marine creatures, is one of the strongest known poisons. It causes paralysis and death from respiratory arrest, while consciousness may be preserved until the very end. Brazil has many poisonous plants and animals that could be a source of toxin. If Manuel and Miguel prepare the capsules themselves using some natural poison source, they could have made a mistake with dosage or incorrectly identified the plant. In occult literature and ethnobotany, there are many recipes for various potions and preparations made from plants with psychoactive or toxic properties. Some of these recipes are dangerous because the difference between an effective and lethal dose can be very small. A person without special training trying to prepare such a preparation can easily make a mistake that will lead to tragedy. It's also interesting to consider the cultural context of Brazil at that time. A country with rich traditions of folk magic, spiritualism, and syncretic religions, such as Candomblé and Umbanda. In these practices, various plants, herbs, and other natural materials are often used for ritual purposes. Manuel and Miguel, interested in spiritualism, could well have become acquainted with these traditions and tried to use some of their elements in their experiments. Perhaps they turned to some practitioner of Candomblé or Umbanda for advice or help in conducting their ritual. In these traditions, there really exist practices related to altering consciousness and contact with spirits. Special chants, dances, drumming are used, and sometimes plant preparations to achieve a state of possession or trance in which, as practitioners believe, spirits can make contact with a person. If Manuel and Miguel tried to conduct something similar, but without proper guidance and understanding of all nuances, they could have exposed themselves to serious danger. It's also worth remembering that in those years, serious changes were occurring in the world regarding consciousness and its altered states. The works of such researchers as Timothy Leary and Aldous Huxley popularized the idea that psychedelic substances can open the doors of perception and give access to deep truths about reality. LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, and other psychedelics became the subject of both scientific research and countercultural experiments. Many people around the world experimented with these substances in search of spiritual experience, and not all these experiments ended well. It's quite possible that Manuel and Miguel heard about these studies and wanted to conduct their own experiment with altered consciousness. They could have read some book or article that inspired them to take this step. Perhaps they corresponded with like-minded people in other countries, exchanging ideas and experiences. In the pre-internet era, such communication was difficult but still possible through letters and specialized publications. One hypothesis that is rarely mentioned but deserves attention is related to the possibility that Manuel and Miguel became victims of their own ignorance in matters of chemistry and pharmacology. They were electronics engineers, not chemists or physicians. Their understanding of how various substances act on the human body could have been superficial, based on what they read in popular literature rather than on scientific knowledge. They could have misunderstood the mechanism of action of the substance they were going to take or underestimated its danger. History is full of examples when people without sufficient knowledge tried to experiment with chemical substances and came to tragic results. Even in our days, when access to information is immeasurably greater than in the 1960s, people continue to make dangerous mistakes, taking unknown or incorrectly dosed substances. Internet forums are full of stories about how someone took too large a dose of something, mixed incompatible substances, or used a drug without knowing about its side effects. Manuel and Miguel could have become victims of exactly such a mistake. They could have received capsules from someone who assured them of the drug's safety, but didn't know exactly what they contained. Or they could have prepared the capsules themselves, following inaccurate or incomplete instructions from some source. As a result, they took a substance that turned out to be much more toxic than they assumed, and this led to their death. The psychological profile of people inclined to such experiments is also of interest. Usually these are people with open minds, curious, not afraid to go beyond the generally accepted. They often possess high intelligence, but they may lack critical thinking regarding certain questions, especially when it comes to things they want to believe in. This phenomenon is known as motivated reasoning, when a person tends to accept information that confirms their beliefs and ignore or underestimate information that contradicts them. If Manuel and Miguel very much wanted to believe in the possibility of contact with other dimensions or higher forces, they could have uncritically accepted information about how to achieve this. They could have minimized the risks and exaggerated the potential benefits of their experiment. Their enthusiasm and confidence, which witnesses noted before their departure to the hill, may be a sign of exactly such motivated thinking. They were confident in the success of their undertaking and didn't allow the thought that something could go wrong. On the other hand, a darker version cannot be excluded, that they knew about the risk of death and consciously accepted it. In some esoteric traditions, death is viewed not as an end, but as a transition to another state of being, as liberation of the soul from the shackles of the physical body. There exist practices of ritual suicide that are viewed as a way to achieve enlightenment or union with the divine. Although this is extremely rare and condemned by most spiritual traditions, such cases are known in history. Is it possible that Manuel and Miguel viewed their experiment exactly in such a light? that they consciously chose death as a way to transition to another dimension or state. The note with instructions in this case can be interpreted as a guide for conducting a transition ritual. The capsules contain means for quick and relatively painless death. The masks served as symbolic protection during the transition, and the signal they were waiting for could have been an internal sign of readiness for the final step. This interpretation makes the case even more tragic because it suggests that the men voluntarily ended their lives, driven by mistaken beliefs about what awaits them after death. Their families lost loved ones who chose to leave in pursuit of an illusion. But this version, like all others, remains unproven. We don't know what Manuel and Miguel actually thought and felt in their final hours, what hopes and fears overwhelmed them as they climbed that hill. One of the most captivating aspects of the case is how it was reflected in popular culture. The story of two engineers in lead masks became a source of inspiration for writers, directors, and artists. Documentary films were made, books and articles written, artistic works created using this case as the basis for their plots. Each author offered their own interpretation of events, adding new elements and developing various versions of what could have happened. Some works presented the case as an encounter with aliens, where lead masks were necessary for protection from UFO radiation, and the men became victims of contact for which humanity is not yet ready. Others saw it as an occult ritual gone horribly wrong, where the forces that Manuel and Miguel tried to summon turned out to be too powerful and dangerous. Still others created conspiracy stories about secret government experiments and conspiracies hiding the truth from the public. Interestingly, the lead mask case became a kind of urban legend that was passed from mouth to mouth, growing with ever new details, some of which were clearly fictional. In various retellings, elements appeared that were not in the original reports. Strange symbols drawn on the masks, additional notes with prophecies, witnesses who saw flying saucers that very night, and much more. This is a normal process of mythologization, when a real event gradually turns into legend, losing factual accuracy, but acquiring deeper symbolic meaning. For modern researchers of paranormal phenomena and unsolved mysteries, the case remains one of the classic examples of a mystery that can have both a quite rational explanation and elements of the truly inexplicable. Skeptics point out that most of the strange circumstances of the case can be explained by a combination of a failed experiment with psychoactive substances, incorrect investigation due to the limited technologies of that time, and subsequent mythologization of events. Believers in the paranormal see in the case proof of the existence of forces and phenomena that science cannot yet explain. The truth most likely lies somewhere in between. Probably Manuel and Miguel really were conducting some experiment related to altering consciousness and attempting contact with something unusual. They took a substance that proved deadly by mistake or through ignorance. The lead masks were part of their ritual, the meaning of which was clear only to them. The rest are layers of interpretations, theories, and fantasies that appeared later. But even accepting this rational version, questions remain unanswered. What exactly did they take? From whom did they get it? What signal were they waiting for? And most importantly, what did they experience in their final moments? The lead mask case became a reminder of how little we actually know about many events, even those that occurred in the recent past and were carefully documented. It shows the limitations of forensic science, especially when it encounters unusual circumstances. It demonstrates how human curiosity and the drive for knowledge can lead to both great discoveries and tragedies. And it makes us think about the boundaries of rational explanation and about the possibility of the existence of phenomena that don't fit into our current picture of the world. If Manuel and Miguel could speak to us now, what would they tell us? Would they confirm one of the existing theories or reveal a completely new perspective on what happened? We will never know. Their voices are silent, their secrets buried with them. Only Vintim Hill remains, continuing to rise above Niterói, a silent witness to that strange and tragic story. Vintim Hill has since become a place of pilgrimage for those interested in paranormal phenomena and unsolved mysteries. People come there trying to feel something unusual, find some traces, or simply pay tribute to the two men whose lives were cut short under such strange circumstances. Some claim that at certain times of day on the hill one can see strange lights or feel an inexplicable presence. Others say it's just a play of imagination and a desire to see something mystical where there is none. The families of Manuel and Miguel kept silent for many years, unwilling to publicly discuss the tragedy that destroyed their lives. The loss was too painful and the circumstances too strange to easily talk about. The children who were left without fathers grew up with a burden of unresolved questions, never learning the full truth about what happened on that August day. For them, their fathers remained loving parents who one day left and didn't return, taking with them a mystery impossible to solve. Over the years, physical evidence disappeared, witnesses died, and memories faded. Only photographs of the crime scene remained, yellowed pages of police reports, and countless articles, each offering its own version of events. The lead mask's case transformed from a real tragic incident into a legend, into part of the collective memory about the inexplicable and mysterious. It took its place alongside other great mysteries of history, such as the disappearance of the Roanoke colony, the mystery of the Mary Celeste, or the Dyatlov Pass incident. What unites all these stories? The absence of a final answer. The human mind is structured so that we crave closure. We need answers to our questions. When we don't get them, we invent explanations, construct theories, create narratives that help us cope with uncertainty. But sometimes the truth is that we simply don't know. Sometimes a mystery remains a mystery, despite all our efforts to solve it. The case of the two engineers in lead masks teaches us humility in the face of the unknown. It reminds us that the world is much more complex and mysterious than we often think. It shows that even in our era of science and technology, questions without answers remain, events that don't yield to rational explanation. And perhaps this is its true value, not in solving the mystery, but in reminding us that mystery exists. Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel Jose Viano went to Vintim Hill in search of something that they believed would change their understanding of reality. Perhaps they were seeking contact with higher forces. Perhaps they wanted to prove the existence of other dimensions. Perhaps they were simply trying to break beyond ordinary existence and touch something greater. In this aspiration, they were not alone. Throughout human history, people have sought answers to eternal questions about the meaning of life, about the nature of reality, about the existence of something beyond the material world. Their experiment ended in tragedy, but their search was understandable and humanly relatable. We all, to some degree, seek answers. All want to understand what lies beyond our everyday experience. The difference is only in how far we're willing to go in these searches and what price we're willing to pay. Manuel and Miguel paid the ultimate price, and their story became a warning that some searches can be dangerous, that not all mysteries should be revealed, and that sometimes curiosity really can lead to tragic consequences. But their story also inspires. It speaks of the courage to explore the unknown, of the readiness to question accepted truths, of the desire to find something more than just existence. In their aspiration, they were true seekers, people who were not satisfied with the ordinary and wanted to touch mystery. And although their journey ended on that hill, their story continues to live, inspiring others to ask questions, seek answers, and not be afraid to look beyond the edge of the known. Today, almost 60 years later, we still don't know what exactly happened on Vinton Hill in August 1966. We don't know what thoughts and feelings overwhelmed Manuel and Miguel in their final moments, whether they saw what they were looking for or died without finding answers to their questions. Perhaps at the moment of death, some truth was revealed to them, some vision or understanding that made everything that happened justified in their eyes. Or perhaps they died in fear and confusion, realizing too late that they had made a fatal mistake. We will never know the truth. The lead mask's mystery will remain unsolved, one of many enigmas that humanity has collected throughout its long history. And perhaps that's how it should be. Perhaps some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us of the limits of our knowledge and of the infinite mysteriousness of the world in which we live. Thank you for being with us on the Fear Files channel. The lead mask's case remains one of the most eerie and captivating unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Two people, a hill, strange masks, and questions to which we may never receive answers. This story reminds us that the world is full of mysteries, and some of them will forever remain a secret. Remember, sometimes the most frightening truth is the one we will never know. See you in the next episode, where we'll continue to explore the darkest and most inexplicable cases from the archives of human history. Stay curious, but be careful, because not all mysteries are safe for those who try to uncover them.